Well, hello everyone. Thanks for dialing into this short conversation that we have today about integrated care system development, the next one in our series. And I'm thankful to be joined today by Professor Sir Chris Ham. Welcome, Chris. Nice to have you. Obviously, Chris's reputation sort of goes before him as a health policy guru, very adept at distilling critical, interesting information out of complex policy developments. And I think now is probably a good time to take stock of where integrated care systems are, given that it's been probably about 4 or 5 months now since integrated care boards were established, and now ICSs are starting to continue on their journey of developing their operating models and thinking about how best to meet population need. Chris, part of the reason I was asking to have a conversation with you today is I was struck by the report you'd produced with the NHS Confederation earlier this year, where you were talking about the conditions for success for integrated care systems. It'd be nice to reflect on that with you today, and really starting with points that you've made about the need for these systems to look and feel different. I'd be really keen to know what you really mean by that and what's important there.
Well, thanks, Phil. What I mean is we've used the phrase coalitions of the willing to describe the emergence of integrated care systems, and that remains for me an accurate description, even though ICSs have now become statutory bodies, because they will succeed or fail on the basis of their ability to draw on the expertise of all the different partners and not become another tier of administration within the complex organization of the NHS. And what I mean, therefore, is they must become systems of and for the partners who make them up: the NHS organisations, the local authorities, the voluntary community sector, and indeed many others besides. And governance clearly is important in enabling that to happen. But much more important, we all recognise this, are the relationships
Mm.
between the leaders of the statutory and voluntary and other organisations who make up ICSs, because you could put in place ever more sophisticated governance, but that will get you nowhere if the relationships aren't collaborative, aren't trusting, and there isn't that willingness in a coalition of the willing to make systems work differently. So I'm really hopeful that we can embrace that opportunity, that we won't, if you like, default to yet another NHS reorganisation that shuffles around the deck chairs, because this could be the time to do something very different and very positive.
Right. Okay. And then what does that mean from your perspective, Chris, in terms of the environment in which people need to operate and work together to make that happen?
Well, the environment has to change, Phil. We can't carry on with top-down performance management, given all the commitments that have been made to devolving decision-making responsibility to integrated care systems and the partners that make them up. So I'd like to see the follow-through on that. And I think it's happening through the development of the new operating model that Amanda Pritchard is undertaking
Mm.
for the NHS in England. Being serious about ICS is having more freedoms and flexibility to take decisions within the framework of national priorities and policies, being held to account, because you can't escape that, nor should you try to, within a taxpayer funded national health service, but having the latitude to bring in local issues, local priorities in agreement with the partners that make up ICSs. And one thing I was struck by in doing the work for the NHS Confederation, talking to ICS leaders, is their reflections. The relationship they have at the moment with the NHS hierarchy often feels like a parent to child relationship.
Right.
They'd like it to be much more adult to adult, where there is respect, where there is trust within the NHS itself, and recognition of the work that ICSs will need to do, as I said earlier on, really to build that coalition of the willing and to give them the time and the space to do so. I think it was David Nicholson who famously said the NHS spends too much time looking up and needs to spend far more time looking out. And that's a view I certainly would endorse.
Yes. And I guess on the topic of looking out, Chris, one of the things that we tend to hear a lot about, and which the policies talk about for integrated care systems, is the need to uh, meet the needs of local communities. It's one of the core fundamental principles of what integrated care systems are for. And I guess it'd be interesting to know what opportunities you think there are for systems to really get into that understanding and meeting the needs of local people.
Well, I agree. I think that is a huge opportunity if we can take it. And for me, what that means is working ever more closely with local government through the Integrated Care Partnership within the ICS, working genuinely differently and positively with the voluntary community sector organizations, using all the assets that exist in every system wherever they can be found in the public sector or indeed in the voluntary sector, and forging a very different type of relationship with the voluntary community sectors than we've had before. I think one of the benefits of that, there are many, but one of the benefits is it will give ICSs more legitimacy when they feel they need to push back on inappropriate external and central intervention, because they can claim quite rightly, if they're doing this work well, that they've done a lot to understand what local needs are through public health colleagues. They've identified local priorities. Many of those won't necessarily be on the national must-do list, but if ICSs are simply agencies for implementing national priorities, then they will have failed. It's that local aspect alongside their role within the NHS that is so important. And we've got some great examples, I think, emerging in places like West Yorkshire and Harrogate, in Surrey Heartlands and elsewhere, where I've seen for myself the difference it makes when ICS leaders are out and about talking to representatives of local communities and then acting on the insights that they're able to obtain. And I think that is what will make or break ICSs as they go forward.
Yes, interesting. And I guess things like the full of Stocktake, if people really embrace what that sets out as a potential way of getting into some of this in terms of integrated neighbourhood teams and those sorts of really local approaches as well, Chris. So I guess sort of just final thought maybe from you, Chris, is if you've got any other sort of tips or suggestions for ICSs in terms of where they are at the moment and where they could be going in the next few months.
Well, I think the biggest thing is for leaders within ICSs, whether on the ICBs or on the ICPs, it's having the resilience and the persistence to work through some of these issues. It's not about flicking a switch and moving from a competitive world to a collaborative world. We know it's much more complex and much more difficult, frankly, than that. So it's rolling with the punches when things get difficult. It's seeing the opportunities and going for them when they present themselves. But this is a long-term task that we're embarked on. If ICSs are going to be very different from what's gone before, they will only achieve that over a 5 to 10 year period, in my view. They need to develop their own capabilities, having the right staff with the right skill mix and being able to work in the way that I've been describing, but they need to be supported through the NHS hierarchy by the new operating model and a genuine commitment to devolution. And it won't always be easy. I sometimes liken leadership in an ICS to a game of snakes and ladders. You know, you feel you're making progress and moving up in the right direction, and sometimes you get blown off course, not necessarily through your own fault, but because of events. And then you have to start again from a position further down. If you're willing to operate in that uncertain and sometimes unstable environment, then you've got a really good chance of succeeding and doing something, I think, that will be a benefit to the populations we serve, and will demonstrate that patients themselves will see the results coming through.
Great. It's all about heading towards the next ladder then, I guess, in that environment then, Chris.
It's
Um,
building the ladder into the sky.
yes. Well, thank you very much for sitting with me today, just to give me some reflections on the sort of where ICSs are and where they could potentially go. Really appreciate it. And thanks for your time, Chris.
Pleasure. Thank you.